Well, welcome everyone today to our lunchtime learning session. My name is Kim Lutz. I'm the Executive Director for America's Watershed Initiative, or AWI. We are a Mississippi River-wide nonprofit organization that focuses on two areas for our actions. One is on science and data to inform decision-making, and this lunchtime series is a priority for that, to provide information on key issues in the basin. And we also work on collaborative partnerships and actions, and in that arena, we are organizing a Mississippi River-wide partnership. And if you want to learn more, you can go to our website to learn more about that effort. So I'm really thrilled to have Rodney with us today. Rodney Weinzierl is a third-generation farmer from Stanford, Illinois. And he and his wife, Kathy, have grown commercial soybean and corn on their 500 acres for over 26 years. In that time, they have implemented conservation practices such as no-till, planting cover crops, and optimizing nitrogen use at the right rate, right time, right source, and right place recommendations. And as such, you might be interested to know that Rod is a member of the Precision Conservation Management Program. So his efforts on his farm are benchmarked against others in his region so that data can be aggregated and shared across to benefit all farmers in Illinois. Rodney also serves as the Illinois Corn Growers Association Director and is on the Illinois Corn and Marketing Board. He has a BS in Agricultural Science and Production from Illinois State University. And Rod and his wife, Kathy, have 3 adult daughters, 2 grandchildren, are in the process of actively bringing their eldest daughter into the family farm via a managed transition plan. So we're delighted to have you here today, Rod, and I will let you take it from here.
All right, thanks, Kim, and very much appreciated having the opportunity to talk to folks here on this virtual presentation. I'm going to share my screen and walk through a few slides that I have, and I'm sure I should have plenty of time for questions. So I'm assuming, Kim, that you can see my screen.
Yes, I sure can. And as Rod is presenting, if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box, and we will have time for many questions at the end of the presentation.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Just a little bit about my professional career within the association. As Kim mentioned, I do serve as Executive Director of the Illinois Corn Growers and Illinois Corn Marketing Board. I've been with Illinois Corn since 1988, so for a little while, and I've been in my current position since 1993. So have a lot of experience working with volunteer boards for many years and working with farmers all of that time. So Kim mentioned a little bit about our farm. Again, third generation. We've actually been farming for the same landlord family since 1912. We own some of our fields, but we've been farming for the same family for a very long time, since my grandfather. Many may not know this, but in Illinois, we have about 24 million acres of tillable farmland. Farmers, the tenants, the people who are actually farming, own about 23% of that. So the remaining 77% of the acres are owned by maybe the spouse of a farmer who's passed away, children, grandchildren of previous farmers, could be cousins, aunts, mom. But the tenant farmer themselves only own and can totally make decisions on that 23% on average. My dad retired in 1999 and worked with us to transition the farm to my wife and I, and actually my brother-in-law. And my brother-in-law just recently retired. And as Kim mentioned, we are bringing my oldest daughter, Gracie, into the operation, continuing to grow corn and soybeans. And when we took over the farm in 1999, we started no-till on beans. And now the most recent 9 years, we've began a system change utilizing cover crops across our entire farm to not only reduce nutrient loss and reduce soil erosion, but also to increase soil health. And I would add here that no-till, going into a no-till practice change is much simpler than going into cover crops, which are an entire system change. So it's you want to go slow when you do that, because it's a complete learning opportunity. Now, I'm going to be talking a little bit about, and why I've asked to speak was, why is the river system important to farmers in the Mississippi River Basin? And part of that relates to corn yields. I'll show soybean yields continue to go up. A lot of people don't realize, but productivity on both corn and beans is probably somewhere to an added 1% to maybe 1.5% per year, pretty steadily across the last 50 years. This first chart I'm showing is the U.S. corn yield and trends, and our expectation is for 182 bushel per acre yield in the U.S. From an Illinois standpoint, Illinois has some of the highest, most productive ground in the nation. And last year, our state average was 217. So, that's quite a bit more than the U.S. average, just to give you a feel. And one thing you'll notice in this yield map here was from the University of Illinois, their Farm Doc Ag Econ team. But one thing that's happened, and there's a lot of conversation in the media around climate change, and I'll touch on a couple points on that. The first is the corn yields in Illinois are actually accelerating. And so that trend line is actually steepening out here a little over the last 10, 15 years. And a lot of it has to do with hybridization, and we're getting better hybrids, better genetics. A lot of it it's actually equipment, auto steer, precision planting. We can plant within a half inch of where we want to plant using global positioning. And our planters are, over the last 5 to 6 years, are much more accurate in planting one corn seed every 5.4 inches. Or you pick your plant population and you can dial it in. And corn yields increase as plant populations that we plant increase. A lot of people also don't realize a corn plant can set many ears of corn, but a farmer only wants 1 ear per stalk. That will maximize yield. And so by increasing yields, by increasing plant population, we're able to increase yields. As we look at soybeans, same yield trend, maybe a little bit steeper relative to the U.S. and the corn trend. And if we look at state yields, again, you see that yield trend is actually accelerating more than corn. And soybean genetics have really improved, and management has really improved, where corn improved a lot probably in the 2000s, 2010s. Soybean genetics and planting management practices have changed a lot more recently, where corn changed, a decade or so ago or more. And it's important to realize as we talk a lot about climate change, there are negatives and there's positives. In this case, our weather is actually getting better for yields, which is our management practices has taken advantage of that. We do get larger rain events and fewer rain events, and that's really why we've begun to adopt different management practices from a production standpoint, i.e. no-till or cover crops. This map, just to describe it, is corn net exports and imports. So the gray circles are the millions of bushels that leave the state. So Illinois, we have nearly 1 billion bushels of production. We produce about 2.1, 2.2 billion bushels of corn every year in Illinois on 11 million acres of ground. Not quite half of that leaves the state. And if you look at the white circles, so where New Orleans is 1.3 billion, Texas 360 million, Mexico 486 million, that's where Illinois corn is going. So exports are a big deal for farmers here in Illinois. Illinois is the largest exporting state in the nation and has been probably for the last 30 years. And that's all attributed to the Mississippi River, the Missouri and the Illinois River feeding into the Mississippi River, as well as the Ohio River across the southeast corner of the state. That's why exports are important to us, and probably more so. I would also say that the export market sets the price for the entire nation on corn, even if the corn doesn't go to exports. It's a very transparent market. Farmers can see it, elevators can see it, buyers of corn, whether they're livestock producers, corn processors can see it. And so that bid that the export market creates pretty much drives the entire marketing system in the United States. Very similar for soybeans. Illinois, again, is the largest exporter of soybeans of any of the states for the very same reasons around transportation and freight, all due to the river system and the efficiency of the river system. And you get a better feel for, how many soybeans are actually going out the Gulf of Mexico there at New Orleans. Just a couple more slides. I had a question ahead of time about what does low water, high water mean for Illinois? And this is a really complicated chart, but it does illustrate that issues are seasonal. So if you look at the blue line, as that line goes up, that basically means river flow is higher. You can see the dotted line kind of across the center as average. And as that blue line is low, that means we're in a low water event. And so the first thing you'll notice is it's seasonal. And it's a question of how high is the high or how high is the low as to whether it creates a problem. The orange or reddish line is barge freight rates. Okay, so barge freight is traded in a market in the St. Louis area. And so barge companies can sell barge freight in that market. Customers like rural co-op elevators who are moving corn or beans or steel or rock or wood pulp or whatever can buy barge freight. And what you'll notice here is when we have low water, and I have a little half circle there, whenever we have low water, and again, it's seasonal, we have a tendency of having barge rate increases. And so this probably depicts the best that I can do in showing that when we have low water events, we will have barge freight increases, and you can see how low the water was in 22 and 23, where we had significant increases in barge freight. The Corps of Engineers and industry has been able to manage that a little bit better, and so there's a little bit more moderation to those price impacts. And so just trying to illustrate and be happy to answer more questions. Typically, low water is a bigger effect to price and barge freights than what high water is. So, tried to be brief. I really want to be able to take questions from all of you there. And I'm just going to start this video as you think of your questions or we begin to answer questions. This is our farm, and this is corn being planted into cover crops. And in this case, I was actually driving and my daughter Gracie was using her drone to capture this. So this will go for a couple minutes, but please submit questions and be happy to answer them whenever Kim wants to start that process.
Well, thank you so much, Rodney. First question, can you tell us why modern infrastructure on the river is important to agriculture, and conversely, how can it hamstring you if it is aging?
So I think there's two big things, and I assume we're talking about, efforts going on here the last several decades on trying to modernize the lock system for the most part, or actually upgrade them to larger ability to take through more barges. So an average towboat barge setup is 15 barges, so 3 wide barges, 5 long, with a line boat or a tugboat pushing them behind. That's just short of 1,200 feet. And so most of the locks on the upper Mississippi and the Illinois River are 600-foot locks. And it takes time, and can be dangerous for the crew, especially in the wintertime where you have snow and ice, in breaking that barge tow in half and passing the first 9 barges through the lock, closing the lock, refilling the lock, and then passing the remaining 6 barges and line boat, and then reconnecting on the other end. So that takes time. Freight is a big cost in moving bulk commodity products like corn and beans. And so time is money. The other thing, though, that could be actually more important is most of the locks' average year life is around 80 to 90 years. And the challenge with that is if that lock has a problem, whether it's an accident happens or more likely just a maintenance failure because they're 80 or 90 years old, that lock is closed and there's no way to get produce either upbound, so fertilizer, road salt comes up, all the jet fuel for O'Hare and Midway Airport, Chicago, road salt, all the chlorine for drinking water moves by water. And so those are huge problems when we have especially an unscheduled closure for some reason, and everybody's not prepared for that. So there's really 2 drivers. One, to get more efficiency out of the system, to be more competitive in the world. But secondly, to limit future unscheduled closures, which can be very costly for the overall economy.
Great, thank you. Next question we have is, how have the recent tariffs affected the corn and soybean markets?
Well, every day I look at the market, it's either going up or down. And it kind of really depends on, what conversation's going on. At a very high level, the U.S. is very competitive, especially on grains, in competing in the world. We do have major competition, especially from Brazil and Argentina. Ukraine, because of the challenges that they faced with Russia invasion, has made them less competitive in the market, but Brazil is highly competitive and is really under expansion of row crop production, namely corn and soybeans. And so the tariffs, kind of on the negative side is it takes a long time to build relationships with buyers in other countries. There are some countries are just price buyers, but there are other countries really value those relationships. And the U.S. is exceedingly dependable. This kind of questions that dependability. And so we want to be careful as we go through this process that we're not damaging those long-term relationships because they're very difficult to get back. The flip side is the food sector, the ag sector is the most protected economic sector in the world, where a lot of other countries have barriers of entry. And the US has very few barriers of entry in ag products. And so there are opportunities in certain unique markets. Just the UK announcement here early this week talked about potentially getting US beef and US produced corn-based ethanol into that market. A lot of discussion with India, which is exceedingly protected food market and has been very difficult for the US to get into those markets. So there's upside opportunity, but there's also downside. And so there's a lot of uncertainty. I don't know if there's a lot of apprehension yet in the farm community, but there will be as we go into late summer, early fall, if we're not seeing more progress like we saw just this week with the UK.
Great, thank you. Another question is, what kind of information, tools, or other resources exist to help Illinois farmers understand current and potential future water availability conditions? And a second part, do any of these tools exist to help farmers track or plan for their own specific needs, permits, wells, etc.?
Well, that's a good question. I think, the technology is getting better, but there's a few things that the farmers can control, and weather's not one of them. And if you asked our membership right now, we have farmers in Southern Illinois that have not planted yet. We've had farmers in Southern Illinois that planted for about 4 days the first week of April and haven't planted yet since. And we have farmers just to the north of Central Illinois that would like a rain. And so Illinois is like 500 miles long, and we have probably about everything going on when it happens to weather. And internally, we always talk about farmers. Farmers are very much an optimistic set of people. If they weren't optimistic, they wouldn't probably farm. And they are the most optimistic in March before they've planted, because once they've planted, somebody has a problem. It's either too wet or too dry or too cold or too hot. So weather's a big deal. I think one reason we're doing cover crops is we have seen that as you increase organic matter, which you're able to do with cover crops, you increase the water holding capacity of soil. And because of that, we think we can minutely weather drought better. We have not had a severe drought since we've had cover crops, but we do see in especially dry falls where we had cover crops earlier, our yields are a little better. Cover crops also increase soil permeability, so the speed at which rain can move through the soil profile or enter the soil profile, so we don't have surface erosion. And those are really kind of the two drivers of why is this is really kind of our only way other than irrigation of being able to try and reduce our risk relative to weather. Okay.
This next question also about water availability, but in a slightly different vein. Are you able to anticipate when water will be low and therefore barge rates increased? If so, how far in advance are you able to plan, and where do you find that information, and how do you prepare or adapt for these changes in water levels or barge increases?
Yeah, good question. So your barge companies, your grain industry elevators, they watch that maybe a lot closer than individual farmers. If you think of the Mississippi River Basin, the Missouri River and the flow out of the Missouri River actually has a lot more to do with the water levels between the Missouri River and like the St. Louis area and Cairo, where there are no locks south of St. Louis. And so people watch the drought monitor really closely, especially out of the plain states. So they're watching for the rain events, but also the drought monitor and how much water is being released. That they watch the core. There's a lot of reservoirs on the upper reach of the Missouri River, and so they watch for what those releases are expected to be. We do get a lot of water out of the upper Miss and Illinois River, but really small as compared to the Missouri flow. And then they're watching the drought monitor and rain events across the southeast and the east coming out the Ohio. Some of that can be kind of managed. And generally, when you get into low water events, there's a pretty good idea that something could happen maybe 60 days out. But, planning probably really starts as it gets closer to the water. And you'll see barge companies position barges above or below, depending on where they think, the market and the flow is going to be. They'll start restricting early. We did a closure of the Illinois River here about 3 years ago to do some major rehab on 5 locks at once. And the grain industry just made the effort to get a lot of grain out before that closure started. But that's the advantage of a planned closure versus kind of an emergency closure where you don't have time to plan. A drought, you probably have several weeks to kind of figure out it's going to get worse unless it rains, but you don't have months.
So I think this will be our last question. In the introduction, it was mentioned that you've implemented several conservation practices or many conservation practices on your farm, such as no-till, planting cover crops, optimizing nitrogen use. How did you go about making the decision to implement? I don't know if it's a different answer for each one, but how did you make some of those decisions?
So I could talk a lot about this, and your audience maybe doesn't have that much time, but there's a couple things. Okay, one, we've been farming the same ground for over 100 years, and especially on ground we own, our whole goal is to be able to pass it on to next generation. So really thinking about how do we leave it better than when we started farming. 10 years ago, it was very difficult to do some of these technologies, but farm equipment is getting better, so it's becoming easier. But that farm equipment carries a pretty big expense. So you do have to kind of think about, you really want to do this. We have never used government programs to do it. And this is kind of an issue we have going on relative to Farm Bill and regulation or restrictions. Illinois has very good productive ground, and a lot of the government conservation programs are geared towards mitigating soil erosion, helping wildlife. That's great in rougher grounds, and so in those areas, your request for a program scores much better the poorer ground you have. In good ground, when you submit for EQIP or some CSP, Conservation Stewardship Program, if you're on good ground, flat ground, you don't score well. And there's also a lot of issues around the practice standards. As an example, the picture I showed of the planter, just pop this up again. All right, so this field is cereal rye. We're planting corn in it. We planted the cereal rye on 30-inch centers with a planter, and now we're splitting that row, planting seed in that between that row of rye. This rye has not been killed yet. Okay, so we're planting what's called in the green. That is not an NRCS approved practice. So I could not do this if I was signed up for an NRCM program. I want that rye to grow a couple more weeks before we terminate it so that we're getting more root growth and I'm getting better coverage as that corn is coming up. I would not be able to do that if I was in a government program. For cereal rye, the seeding rate that I should be using is around 60 pounds an acre. I'm using about 15 pounds an acre. All right. Again, I would be thrown out of the program. I think I've got plenty of rye there. And that 60 pounds is a good number if I'm aerial applying it where all that seed's not going to germinate. But when I use a planter, I'm getting 98% germination out of that seed. And government rules do not allow what I'm doing to qualify. And I'll be honest, when you go towards cover crops, everything changes. My diseases that I have to look for are different. The insect pressure I'm going to get is different. Corn, beans are going to react differently to when and how I'm planting them, as well as using other crop protectant tools. I have to kind of learn each year and get better the next year. So when we started with cover crops ahead of beans. It probably took 6 years before we were comfortable, before the entire farm of beans had cover crops ahead of them. Corn is much more difficult to do. And we really didn't start that until about 4 years ago. And this will be the second year that we have cover crops ahead of all of our corn. I personally know 2 farmers that went bankrupt because it didn't work. And so you've got to go. Cover crops are a system change. They're not a practice change. They're not, you have to learn. And each year you learn a little bit more and you become a little bit more comfortable. Using the right amount of nitrogen timing, that's pretty simple. There's a lot of ways you can rescue the crop if something's not working right. No-till is more complicated than nitrogen rates, but less complicated than cover crops. And so one thing in our PCM program that we have is we really try and take farmers, hey, do a couple fields the next year more, work your way into it. Don't try and do it all at once. So that's what we're, and going all the way back, I like to practice what I preach.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you to all our attendees for your great questions that you had for Rod. We will post this on our website so you can view it again or pass it on to people who maybe couldn't participate today. And everyone who participated, you'll get a very short 2-question survey, basically just asking us how we could improve and what you would recommend for future talks. So again, many thanks, Rod, for your information. A really fascinating talk today. And we look forward to seeing you, many of you next month for our next topic, which will be on the inland navigation system. So thanks again. Everyone have a good day.